Welcome back, travelers. Now, this is interesting because at this point, Midnight Hunt has already come out. In addition, Crimson Vow is going to be coming out by the time we're done with this session. Most
We're gonna
likely.
get a new Soren.
Yeah, new Soren, hopefully a new Davriel, maybe a Tascenda. Who's Tascenda? Maybe you'll find out in about 10 episodes. But the point is that we're going to go ahead and just cover a lot of the stuff that happened during the Shadows over Innistrad and Eldritch Moon block. So basically, it opens up with Helena and Alena. Helena and Alena? Alena. You know what I mean. In order to make it easier to say, one's Hal, one's Alena. That's how they refer to each other. And so the two of them, they go basically from town to town throughout the Ulvenwald, which is the name of the forest that all these villagers live in. And
Hydra.
yes, exactly. And they're trying to find a werewolf. They think there was a werewolf that's been doing some messed up stuff, and so they start investigating. And one of the things you're going to notice is that for these few episodes that we're going to be covering for the first part of this session, is that there's a lot of investigation going on. It's almost as if it's a new mechanic that's just been introduced. And at this point, nobody knows why things are suddenly starting to get really, really weird out of nowhere for no particular reason. And so they know there's werewolves in this area. In the Ulvenwald, there's werewolves. They know something's going up, and they keep exploring and trying to figure things out, right? But they start to notice that there's these other aspects where it's not werewolves. It looks like some kind of rituals are being done. And they realize that it's this character named Mrs. Palter, and that she is possessed. And basically, it's a whole thing with Ormondal. Suddenly, Ormondal's involved in this small village problem, and it's yeah, they've been sacrificing people. There's a person that's been going around sacrificing people specifically to basically bring Ormondal to full power. What about the werewolf? The pieces did not fit. There were tracks in the forest. There were clear lupine prints. There was a cow that got eaten. This wasn't her. And it's at this point that this whole mystery, and obviously I'm ruining the mystery, but if you want, you can read this story yourself. It's on the Wizard site. There is a werewolf in this area. This is actually when
werewolf's the hero.
We get introduced to Arlen Cord in this story. This was the first time we actually get to know Arlen Cord. The thing is that she's kind of not really the character that we know now. Similar, but not as extreme to how Nissa was an elf supremacist. We have here basically Arlen Cord show up with a pack of wolves, kill the witch, and then tells Alena and Hal, hey, leave my people alone or we will kill you. The only reason you're alive right now is because we had a shared enemy.
The Arlen we know that's characterized is actively trying to separate herself from the werewolf pack.
Yes. Arlen Cord is not so much I'll just read this last bit. Arlen Cord darted between the tangled trees. The foolish humans, how could they be so blind? She hoped she would not be forced to kill them one day. They were strong and wild, characteristics she valued. In another life, she might have befriended them, but this was not that life. In this life, Arlen could not have friends. And so that's kind of where Arlen is when she's first introduced, and we kind of get a little bit more out of her from there. That said, it's not necessarily a retcon. It could just be character development. As you will progress through the story, you'll see what I mean. But obviously that was way too short to be a full legendary lore, so I'm also going to cover the second part, which is the more important part, which is all about Avacyn. And she's listening to everybody praying, give us a good crop this season, protect my family, give me a safe travel, help me win the werewolf lottery. You get the idea. It's just a bunch of Innistrad people doing their thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in her, the inside of her head, there's this overarching sound of just the word protect, right? Protect them. Because Soren had basically ingrained that into her entire being. And so that's kind of Avacyn's whole deal. She's got the silverish clothing. She's got the green skirt deal, silver hair, super porcelain alabaster skin.
Didn't she wear black?
Well, later on in a few paragraphs, yeah, she'll be wearing black for sure.
Didn't
So-
the original Avacyn wear black?
It was like it's silver, but it looks blackish in comparison to the rest of her because everything else is like a bright golden white.
Okay.
But yeah, like if you were to look at Archangel Avacyn, which is on the screen currently, you'll see that she actually is not covered in just black and white, which was something I didn't notice until I started doing this. I always thought she was in black and white as well, and thought that was like cool, indicative of Soren. But I see that there's actually a little bit of like a greenness and a silverness to what she's wearing that makes more sense for her character at this point, simply because she is the defender of the humans who are represented by green white in the story, in the card game. So continuing, we have a single prayer that pulls Avacyn down to a village, and it's a woman, and she's crying out for her child Maeli. And Maeli, I don't know why it sounds slightly Italian.
I was gonna wonder why she was Italian, but one of us has to be able to do an Italian accent. We both know I can.
So basically, this happens, and Avacyn comes down, and Avacyn's like, "I'm here," and she's like, "Oh, thank you, Avacyn. Thank you so much. Find my child." And so Avacyn goes out, and it's like, if the kid was praying, I'd be able to hear them. But the kid isn't praying, so I can't do that. I need to like search for them. So Avacyn just like goes above the trees and just like uses her booming voice, sends it across the wall, and says, "Child, call to me." And the child starts calling to her. She zooms in, picks up the kid, and gets out. Brings
Let me
to the
find
kid.
this lost child with my angel vision.
Yeah, pretty much, with my angel ears. And the mom is there. She hugs the kid, and she's like, "Oh, yes, thank you. I'm so happy." And then suddenly, there's this switch on the mother's face. After she knows the kid is okay, she starts scolding them. "How could you run away like that? What were you thinking?" And like she pushes the child away from her. And the kid's just like on the ground crying. And Avacyn looks down out on this. And the whole time this is happening, even while she had been trying to save the kid, there's this humming sound that Avacyn is not used to. That Avacyn has never heard before. And it's like this irritant in her ears. And it keeps the buzzing. It's like a zzz kind of deal. She looks down on these mortals and in her head she gets the thought, the seeds of men are rotten. And she says, these mortals, they travel from anger to guilt and back again. And what is ever accomplished? How short they live. Today, this little child, this innocent creature, is going to be a man. A dirty, uncouth, prone to anger and cruelty man. And the day after that, his flesh is going to be nothing but worms and dirt and dust. They're literally just, they're nothing. Why is she doing this? Why is she allowing these creatures to cause such destruction among themselves? And it kind of like, it starts eating at her, right? And then you have another guy. And it's in another courtyard in a sanctum of one of the churches. His name is Matcher, and he's just kind of going around and he's praying. And this guy's kind of struggling with this. He's on the crisis of faith. And so he prays to Avacyn. She's real. But is she worthy of our worship? And he basically just prays to her. He's like, "Avacyn, please exist, please be true." And when he prays that, he thinks to himself, yeah, well, obviously she's both those things. And he kind of thinks it's funny. And then he hears the beating of wings behind him.
It's like, oh, you do exist. My prayers were answered.
And he
can't go wrong in any way.
Yeah, pretty much. And she shows up. And she's there in all her glory, the moon behind her, her glowing white eyes rimmed with black, which they always are. And he sees her spear, and it's glowing white, and there's sparks of red at the tip. And she's just there. And she descends into the courtyard very gracefully, and her wings fold behind her. She stares at him, and he's looking directly into her eyes. And then, as he's looking in her eyes, he's really confused because it looks like he was already hallucinating slightly beforehand, because when he was praying earlier, he was looking at a little Avacynian collar statue, and he could have sworn it was dripping or like moving weird, which he thought was
That's
really
one of the clues.
But yes, it is.
Dripping Avacyn.
Yes. And so he saw that and he was like, "That's weird. That's really weird." And so he's looking at Avacyn, and her eyes look like they're kind of warping, and there's like black pools forming inside the white and like going in and out, which makes no sense. And he's like, whoa, that's weird. And when he sees her, he's like, it's Avacyn. She's here to like reassure me. She's my God. And she goes, you prayed for me to come. You prayed to me. You prayed to me because you doubted. There are other ways of ending your doubts. And she points her spear at him. And then she smiles. She has never smiled in her entire life. And she asks him, are you pure? He's like, yes. Yes, I am. And as he looks at her eyes, they go entirely black. And he falls to the ground, and he's like, I'm just not meant to look at her directly because you're not meant to look upon divinity, basically, is what she says. And she goes, have you lost faith in me so easily, mortal? And he's like, duh. Well, and then she looks at him, and then she looks at the sky and says, the more interesting question is, have I lost faith in you?
Hail Hydra.
And it's like, oh, sniff. Like, she's right on the cusp of just entirely snapping, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then she looks at him and she says, soon. And the guy's screaming in terror. And she just leaves him. Leont is a former werewolf. He was part of the Curse Mute. And when he was blessed by Avacyn, instead of becoming a wolfier, he was so repentant, he actually became a full-fledged human again. And so he was actually able to return entirely to his family, which he was super happy about.
That is awesome.
And so it actually just opens up on him. He wakes up, and I'll just describe some of the things it talks about. It talks about the beautiful winter sun. He says, normally the shutters are closed to prevent this, but he had forgotten to close them last night. And one of the shutters was even hanging off to the side like it was slightly broken. He says, I'll have to fix that later. And he rolls over to his wife, and he like nudges her. She doesn't wake up. And he goes, okay, well, I guess that she's just tired from last night or something. And he's usually his kids have woken him up too. So he gets up and he gets off some of the like torn up bed sheets that he's got. And he goes into his starts going through the room, right? He's a smith. He's an ironsmith, right? Mm-hmm. And so he goes and he's like getting ready. He's going to go to the forge and the anvil and do all this stuff there. And so he's like, I'm just going to go go to my children real quick, and I'll tell them good morning, all that stuff. And so he goes, he gets dressed up, and he's putting on his clothes, and he's looking at like, there's like a hole in like some of his clothes. He's like, wow, I need to give these to Hilda tonight. Hilda's his wife, because they really need to get fixed up. And so she looks over at him and she says, good morning, husband. And like her mouth barely moves, and she says, like, she's out of it. And he goes, I'm going out to the smithy. I need to go get the plow, start it for this other family. The children are asleep. You're good, right? And she goes, the boxes are out in blue. And he's like, okay, sure. I'll be back at midday for lunch. And she goes, when the door is knocked, do not open it. And he's like, okay.
Well, then how will we find out who's there?
I guess.
Silly.
And so he goes over to where one of his kids are, and he's like, for some reason, there's like some little bits of wood and glass on the floor, like something got knocked over. And he's like, my wife is not going to be happy about this mess. I'll sweep it later. And he goes over to his daughter, Talia. She's also asleep. And he goes and she says, good morning, Father. And
is Talia like is it just a namesake, or is this a Talia?
No, this is just Talia, not Thalia. So he says, go back to sleep. And she says, Father, when the door is knocked, do not open it. And he's like, that's weird. And he kisses her head and he tells her good night, go back to sleep. And he goes, and he starts getting like this sense of dread because they both said that, and he thought that was really weird. But he just pushes it aside, and he's like, wow, it's kind of cold in here. I'll have to board up some of the holes that are in the walls. And so he goes over to his son, Khan. And Khan is only a few years younger than Talia, right? Uh-huh. And like the kid's like usually full of energy, but he's asleep. And the kid says, "Good morning, father." And once again, just like the others, he's like really tired. He doesn't even see his face moving right when he says it. And Leon gets worried because he thinks maybe that his son is sick because of the way he's acting, right? And then the kid's eyes like just open, and he says, "Father, when the door is knocked, do not open it."
He goes, "Okay, I'm installing a doorbell. I'm getting the picture."
And then the kid's eyes shut, and he's gone, right? And he's like, Leon's just trying to figure out what's going on. And he's like, why is there so much sunshine? Why is there such a chill? Why? And then he hears a knock.
Why is it so cold when there's so much sun? Am I in the Rio Grande Valley?
He hears a knock at the door. And then he hears all their voices in his head. When the door is knocked, do not open it. And there's this scent. He picks up a scent, like a coppery, bitter scent. And again, the knock is there again. And he's like, he goes to the front, like to where the front door should be. And he sees that there is no door. It's just completely open. The hinges on the door are twisted and bent. And he says, I'm gonna have to forge new hinges. And then there's another knock at the door. And the knocking seems to be echoing through his mind. And he realizes that the door is in his mind. And he imagines a bright, pulsing red door. And the knocking will not stop. And all he can hear is, do not open the door, followed by a raucous knocking. He reaches for the handle in his head. An ice cold metal handle. And it doesn't want to turn. And he pushes it, and his hand begins to get hurt from the cold. And he pushes again, he begins to growl as he pushes the door. And then the door breaks. And he falls to his knees. And he begins to rock him back and forth. Because then he looks around the rooms. On the walls, the bed, the floor, his hands, his body. Blood everywhere. Hild, her face frozen in terror, unmoving on the bed. His children mutilated by a werewolf attack. And he says to himself, who has done this? And he knows exactly who did this. And he says, the curse mute, what happened to the curse mute? Avacyn, why have you forsaken me? And he's sobbing on the ground. He looks up at his ruined house. And he says, please let it be yesterday. Let me go to sleep and wake up yesterday. I will wake up and I will leave. I will leave and never return. Just let it be yesterday. And then his roof explodes. And Avacyn is there. And all he can say is, please, please. And she points her spear at him. And he says, this is what I deserve, but please, mercy. Mercy for my family. And she says, justice. There is no mercy. And obliterates him. And it's like, oh my gosh. This is the world that we are in. We're in a world where everyone is terrified, where there are people trying to bring demons into existence, where there are angels who are questioning their own faith, and where there are people who can't even trust themselves. And it's at this point that we also get a slight view of Sigarda. And Sigarda's looking out, and she's like, there's a storm coming. There's like this huge dark gray sky. There's no thunder, there's no rain. It's just this giant looming presence in the sky that seems to be encroaching on everything.
There's some shadows over this plane we're on. Innistrad, there are shadows over Innistrad here.
Gisela and Bruna show up. And the two of them are there, and they're like, hello, sister. You did not respond to our summons. And they're like, okay. She's like, okay, that's kind of weird, but you guys, it wasn't anything big, was it? We're good, right? And she's like, yeah, we're good. And Avacyn shows up, and she's like, we're good, right? And she goes, So basically, you have Bruna and Gisela slowly starting to flank Sigarda and then till they're entirely behind her, and Avacyn talking to Sigarda and basically telling her the great work is soon to be underway. And there's like Sigarda notices there's a buzz to Avacyn's voice, like there's an underlying hum, like the hum that Avacyn had been hearing is now actively coming out of her. And all three angels are there, and it's at this point that we actually get introduced to the whole idea of Liesa and what her whole deal was. And this is where we learned that she got killed by Avacyn a long time ago and all that stuff. And so Sigarda knows she can't win a fight against Avacyn, especially if Gisela and Bruna are backing up the Archangel, right? And so I'm kind of cutting through this with a lot of conversation going back and forth where they talk about philosophy and human crimes and stuff like that. And basically Avacyn just says, Sigarda, you know the truth. These humans are rotten to the core. She says, I know these are hard truths. They're difficult. And it took Bruna and Gisela some time to understand them as well. But eventually they saw the light. And then both in the back, they go, now we believe. And it's like, okay. Okay. And Avacyn says, right now, I'm not going to do anything about it. You don't have to answer me right now. I'm going to leave. I'll give you time to meditate. Then we can talk and we'll figure it out. But just know, after all this is done, there will be no more violence, no more war, and no more darkness. Only everlasting light. We go back to the mother and child from the beginning of Avacyn's bit, where Maeli and Kelsey, they see angels showing up. And everybody's all like, oh, that's so cool. There's like an entire flight of them overhead. And then one of them points a spear down and shoots a blast and obliterates somebody's house, bursting it into flames. And they're like, that's weird. That shouldn't have happened. And everybody starts kind of panicking. And
okay, what'd that guy do? We probably didn't do that too, right? We're good so far.
Yeah, it was kind of like that whole idea of like, oh, they deserved it at first. And then it started happening to everybody. And then they panicked because the angels are suddenly attacking just normal people. Avacyn, please, Avacyn, save us. Do all that stuff. And then Avacyn behind her just says, you do not need to pray your lies to me, creature. I'm right here in front of you.
Oh, no.
And she's like, oh, snap. And now Avacyn's entire garb is just completely dressed in black. She has her white wings stained with blood, her eyes entirely blackened. Kelsey had just already told Maeli, run away, run as fast as you can into the woods, do not come back. And Avacyn just watches as everything burns, her fiery temper consuming the entire town. And she says, for so long, I have listened to the whispers of liars, and the world has suffered. Why didn't I not realize how inconsistent these mortal creatures are? Their words always change, no matter now. All will burn, all will bleed. And that is what is repeating in her head now. That's how we're going to end this episode.